doing this.
Awesome. Thank you for the introduction. Hi, everybody. My name is Julie Sebby. I'm an employee with SM Energy, and my presentation today is entitled 99 Problems and Data Quality is All of Them. And so I've spent my 16-year career in the industry working for the likes of Shell, WPX, Petro AI, and I've been with SM Energy for the last 6 years. I've touched data in every corner of the industry, from drilling completions all the way to renewables and pipeline, refining, chemicals. And I'm currently part of the SM Energy AAET team, which stands for Advanced Analytics and Emerging Technology, which is a pretty common acronym these days. More and more oil and gas companies are spinning up their own analytics teams. My specializations are Spotfire and Alteryx, and I have a blog and YouTube channel where I post new content on these applications every week. And I tried to do something in writing and in video for every post. I know some people prefer one medium over the other. I personally like to read rather than watch. I've also included my LinkedIn URL, so please feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn and or subscribe to my YouTube channel. So now let's get down to my data quality problems. To get started, I want to talk a little bit about our AAET team. We work projects in two ways. Any of our functional lines of business can submit project build requests to the team, and we'll assess, plan, and build out analytics projects. Or, more recently, within the last year, we've started doing 2-week sprints, where prior to the sprint, we put together, or the business puts together, a catalog of prioritized work, and then we pick from that, essentially from that wish list, and attempt to complete as many projects as possible within that 2-week period. So when we first organized as a team, it was more about individual requests, but now we do more of these sprints. And so our completion team reached out with a request that seemed really simple on the surface. They said, hey, we'd like you to make a few changes to an existing Spotfire dashboard. Somebody built this for us about a year ago, but we aren't really using it because it's really slow and the visualizations just aren't quite what we want, and we just need a little bit of help to tweak it. And I suspect that some of you are already suspicious of this request because you've gone through something similar where a customer says it's just a few things, but really it's a giant thing. And after I dug into the details, I realized that what was described as a few tweaks was actually a complete rebuild. And it needed to be rebuilt because one of the main problems was that it was super slow to load. There were a lot of tables, and Spotfire was doing a lot of processing on the data every time somebody opened the file. And so I love Spotfire. I think it's a great visualization tool with a lot of flexibility. I love the ability to incorporate property controls, and there's so many dynamic things that you can do in it. I also think it has a lot of good data engineering functionality for a visualization application. However, that functionality comes at the cost of longer load times. And at SM, we are increasingly turning to Alteryx more and more to essentially speed up Spotfire by taking the data wrangling out of Spotfire. And not only do data wrangling tasks add to Spotfire load times, but Alteryx also has a lot more data wrangling functionality than Spotfire. And there are many things I can do in Alteryx that I can't do in Spotfire. And I'm going to try to show you those things in my demo. So therefore, when we rebuilt this Spotfire project, we took all the processing out of Spotfire and put it into Alteryx, so that all Spotfire had to do was put in a small number of tables and not do any heavy lifting. And for those of you who aren't familiar with Alteryx, it's a tool that combines data preparation, data blending, and analytics with an intuitive interface that doesn't use any coding. And yes, I copied and pasted that off of their website, but it is an accurate description. Okay, so this is part of an Alteryx workflow, and I wanted to show you this so that before I get too far down the road, you can have a visual of what Alteryx looks like. And this is the top part of the workflow that I built for this project. Now, everything on the left here in the yellow container is an input tool. And these input tools are querying different tables in WellView. And all of the little icons that you see represent different data processing tools. Some of these tools are removing white space, renaming columns, joining data, unioning data, pivoting data, and creating formulas. So in the description that I gave earlier, I said it's an intuitive interface without coding. And so this kind of shows that you use each of these individual tools in order to apply some type of data wrangling or processing. So at this point in our story, it's about 3 months since I first started. And I didn't dive too much into the details of what this Spotfire project is because it's not terribly relevant. But basically, what I'm trying to build is a really big Spotfire dashboard with a bunch of completions metrics. And so at this point, it's about 3 months since I've started. I've built a huge workflow in Alteryx whose output feeds into Spotfire. I've got all the visualization and the metrics built up in Spotfire, and we are in testing mode. And I'm working with Ernie Garcia, who is one of our completion supervisors, and Vicky Martinez, a completions tech, and they're both located down in Midland. And we kept going through this same awful process where Ernie would call me and say the metrics don't tie out to his spreadsheets, and we would look at it together and realize that there was bad data being entered into WellView. And so WellView is the application we use to capture drilling, completions, workover, and a handful of other, or a lot of other data points. And so we would fix that data and then start testing again. And it never took more than 3 days for more bad data to be entered. Every time, and on top of that, every time we dug into it, we just seemed to find more and more bad data. So we were just digging a deeper and deeper hole, stuck in this awful feedback loop. Now, there are some controls that you can institute from WellView, but not nearly as many as we needed. And as a result of all of this, we couldn't launch the Spotfire dashboard that I had spent several months building. Now, this was all happening right around our business planning cycle, and the AAET team was discussing how we could make a difference to our business. And our team lead asked the question, if you could do one thing to add value to the business, what would it be? And so my answer was fix their bad data. I wanted to be their data hero, and so I wanted to be their data hero and solve all of their data quality problems, because I knew that not only would that help their business, but then we could get this dashboard deployed. And I didn't get my animations correctly, or my animations done correctly. So I couldn't find a picture on the internet of a female data hero, and so I found this guy and then just sort of cropped my face on top of him. But I didn't get my animations right. So that's where we went into planning. Is that I said I wanted to fix their bad data because I know it's gonna help them, and it's also gonna help me get onto a new project. So after So after 3 months of work, I made the decision to stop working on this dashboard and go off on a data quality side quest. And the goal of the side quest was to make bad data visible. And I started by creating rules, business rules, for all of the data quality errors that we were seeing polluting our metrics in testing. Then we expanded that, and I worked with our techs to create rules for all the bad data that they saw in WellView. And it turns out that one of the side benefits of this project was making life easier for techs, because we have the field guys who enter the data make the corrections. And so it winds up being a whole lot less work for our techs. And as I built out the rules, they were deployed via an automated Alteryx email report, as well as a Spotfire dashboard. And on top of that, we embedded an error count into our scorecards so that not only did we make the field staff knowledgeable of the errors they needed to fix via those reports, but our management could see if there were any errors impacting the metrics that they were viewing. And so here's a look at that. So this is a simple bar chart that our supervisors review to see stage counts. And on the left, right in here, I added an account of how many errors might be impacting the stage count. So if you see 0 here, then they know that stage count is accurate. If there's anything other than 0, then it's quite possible that the numbers they're looking at are wrong. So now I wish I could say that it was all sunshine and roses after we made the decision to go on that side quest. But as you know, side quests are often kind of just fraught with their own set of problems. I believe we've all seen Lord of the Rings. Same things apply. I made one very big mistake on my side quest. I put a priority on speed rather than on the quality of the output. So when I built this, or at the time that I built this, I was still much faster working in Spotfire than I was in Alteryx. And so I built up my business rules and my logic in Spotfire, and that failed miserably for one very simple reason. So in WellView, and this is a WellView screenshot, you have to navigate one well at a time. You can choose a well, and then you can modify its data. So if I'm working on this well, I'll come in and I'll select the completion job. And if I know I have daily operations or time log errors, I'll come fix those. If I know there's also some perf or stimulation interval errors, I'll come in and fix those. But I have to do it one well at a time. And when I built out the QA/QC project in Spotfire, I built it based on the table the data is stored in. And so the phase data is in a table, daily operations is a table, time log is a table, etc. And so the problem was that there wasn't an easy way for the field staff to see all of the errors for one well, fix it in WellView, and then move on to the next well. Now, if you're an advanced Spotfire user, you're probably saying that I could have created relations in Spotfire in order to integrate my filtering. And that's true, but the scale at which we're working here is I was working with about 35 different WellView tables, and when you try to integrate filtering across that many tables, it can get really messy. And so I started over again, and I built this out in Alteryx. And this time I nailed it. Now, this shot here is a very big, zoomed out version to show you exactly how large this workflow is. And everything that's in these colored containers are tools that are performing QA/QC actions. Blue containers are for Midland, green containers are for rules that apply to Houston, and the orange containers are rules that apply universally. And as you can see, the QA/QC part of it became roughly half the project. I'm doing just as much work to check the data as I am to actually assemble it. And so the reason that this was the reason that my Alteryx version was a success was because I created one table that merged all of the errors. I kept it simple and streamlined. And so in this screenshot, you can see here 3 errors related to our time log where the time log coding is incorrect. And so I first use the filter tool to filter down to the errors. And then I use a formula tool and the select tool to create the exact same set of columns for every single error. And you can see that I'm bringing in the district, the well identifier, well name, error name, test number, and then I am creating a date time, error info, and error value column, as well as more info table and WellView screen. And this is essentially my template. I'm always going to have a date time column, although what the date time in this column is going to vary depending on the table. I'm always going to have an error info and an error value. And then when I pull this up in Spotfire, I'll show you how the more info column helps to translate what they're looking at in these 3 columns right here. And so this one table is combining the errors from over 35 different tables in WellView. And I could not have done the same thing in Spotfire because in Alteryx, I can pick data out of different places, and I can't do that in Spotfire. And I'll explain that in a little bit more detail in my demo. So I'm going to escape out and drag some screens over. Okay, so this is what the output looks like in Spotfire. I've created a very simple summary page that shows how many errors there are, which WellView screens they happen in, the error name, and the date time if that's applicable. In the working version of this, there's also usually a well name filter right here, but for legal reasons, I've taken that out. Just know that there should be a well name filter here that the field staff could use to find everything for one well. And if I go to the next page, you can see what the detailed table looks like. And the most important column is the more info column, and that's translating what's in error value and error info. And it also specifies how the test was conducted. So if I filter down to this particular error, number 38, the error here says, so the job has ended, but the phase start or end is null. And so I check for that by looking for a null phase start or end date when my job end date is populated. And the error value is always going to be null, or essentially say no info. But in the error info, it's going to tell you which phase this is a problem in. And so we have a phase called science. And so the user would then need to go into the phases well-view screen and find the science phase. And in that part of well-view, correct the fact that there is a missing date time. And so this is a whole lot simpler than what I had going on in Spotfire. And I'm going to drag over my Alteryx screen. Okay, make some of this a little bigger. Now, this workflow is absolutely enormous. If I start to zoom out of it, you can see how big it is. And so I'm not going to go through the whole workflow, but I do want to focus on some of the things that I said I couldn't do in Spotfire. So first off, and actually I need to jump back to Spotfire to do that. So in Spotfire, they have the data canvas that is attempting to show you in a pictorial view exactly how any given table is built up. So here we can see that I started with something called Midland Completions Dataset, and then I'm joining to several other tables, and I've added in a lot of calculated columns. But this is limited because I can't actually hook into the different places in this workflow. I can add to this, but if I want to come to this point in the workflow and take advantage of this data, I can't do that. I can do that in Alteryx because all of these tools have input and output anchors. So at any point in my workflow, I can just connect into these anchors and drag them into new tools. And so I can literally use data that occurs or lives at any point in my workflow. And that actually wound up being really important because some of my rules I need a test for early, but then there are other places where I'm doing a lot of calculations and I need to apply the rule at the end of my workflow. So that's really important. Also, in Alteryx, you can only create inner joins, where it's going to show only the records that match based on the keys. So if we look at this, this is a join tool, and you can see here that I am joining my completion job to my AFE data. And what comes out of this J anchor is everything that inner joins based on this key. Excuse me. And so that may seem a little bit limiting to only be able to do inner joins, but what happens is you can see the fallout of that inner join in either the right or the left anchor. And so then what you can do is use then a union tool to add back in any data that falls out of your join. So essentially you can still create left joins, right joins, inner joins, full outer joins. But I really love this part of Alteryx because you can see what falls out and then choose to do something with it, which you can't do in Spotfire. And there are a lot of rules that I have that the violation of the rule is something is falling out of the join. And so that's just kind of a little look at some of the things that you can't do in Alteryx that you can do in Spotfire. So I'm going to go back to my presentation mode. Sorry about that. And so I just have 2 more slides to kind of wrap up my presentation. I wanted to end by discussing the keys to success and the benefits of this project. What do we get out of it? So first off, we employed the right technology. Now, maybe not at the start, but we got there. And I'm actually really proud of the fact that I stopped and said, this just is not working. We have to start over. And that can be really hard to do when you're working with new technology or when you're months into a project to just say, this isn't it. We got to do something different. And then second, we made it usable. I didn't ignore the field staff when they told me that my tool was kind of a pain in the rear to use. I said, okay, what can we do to make your experience better? How can we make this take as little of your time as possible? And they said, give me something where I can filter down to all of the errors for a single well. And so that made it a more usable tool. And then thirdly, we made the errors visible to everyone. By putting that error count into our scorecards, it had a big impact. It got supervisors on the phone, driving the demand to fix bad data. And then lastly, I worked in small batches. We ultimately have about 90 business rules applied to roughly 35 tables. And if I had run this like a waterfall project where I built all the rules before deploying it to the business or asking them to test it, it would have taken forever and quite honestly just been soul crushing. And I also wouldn't have been able to work on anything else concurrently, which is in our modern day work environment, not really an option. I don't know many people who have the luxury of working on one project at a time. So instead, I worked on 3 to 5 rules at a time until they were complete. And when they were done, they were deployed immediately and we just kept adding on to them. I would occasionally break things, but because so many people were looking at it, we'd find it and fix it very quickly. So not only did that get something to the business faster, but it also just felt good. Like to me, it felt like every day I was making measurable and meaningful progress. And who doesn't want that in their day-to-day work? So lastly, the benefits of the project. So we have good data and we know it, and I love being able to say that. And then second, we actually deployed the dashboard that we set out to work on. Like, does anyone remember that that was the original goal, that we had a Spotfire dashboard that we were trying to roll out? So that project was completed and deployed successfully. And then thirdly, I created something that was scalable and repeatable. You saw in that well view screen where we had a list of jobs. And so in order to make a lot of the same rules apply to drilling, all I had to do was change my query and say, give me all the drilling jobs. And so I eventually modified the exact same project for drilling with minimal fuss, and now drilling has good data too. And then additionally, both projects demonstrated that our team could deliver solutions, solve problems, and add value to the business. And that includes solving problems that they didn't even know they had. I think they were a little bit suspicious of that they had bad data, but they definitely didn't know how deep that went. And now we have a great relationship with both the drilling and completions teams. And just in general, this was a really big step forward in terms of advancing analytics of the company because we now know that we have good data. And then lastly, it's not on this slide, but another benefit cropped up a few months later when we shifted from being a regionally aligned organization to a functionally aligned organization. And so when we changed that org, our completions teams merged and they wanted to start operating in the exact same way regardless of location. And it turns out that my QA/QC project with the little color-coded boxes of I don't remember if they're blue for Midland or orange for Houston or green for both. That was the perfect roadmap for showing them where they were operating differently. And that's not to say that they didn't know. They certainly had a lot of ideas, but I had it actually all written down and mapped out. They didn't have to go through some long, painful meeting trying to talk up all the differences. And I was able to actually facilitate a discussion to show them how they were operating differently based on data. And I'm really proud of that. It saved everybody time, money, and effort. And so with that, I will stop for questions. Questions? Matthew, how many user interviews did it take to build that? Um, it wasn't. It was daily contact with the techs. I would talk to our techs for half an hour to an hour every day for 2 or 3 months. But I think what I also, whenever we attempted to transition this project or kind of um, essentially sell it to drilling, what I told them was, I'm only going to take up small chunks of your time. I'm going to take up 10 minutes of your time, 15 minutes of your time. I'm not going to slap a bunch of hour-long meetings on your calendar and, suck your people away from day-to-day operations. And that was really appreciated. Any other questions? Chat? Let me see if there's anything in chat. Oh, that's what that was.
Julie, can you say anything about the error tracking? It looked like you built in, you had like a whole bunch of different sources, but when you had the 30 different sources and a kind of a short quip to explain what the error was, how did you manage to keep track of where a source of error might be as you go through some of the troubleshooting and fixing things?
That's a good question. And so let me escape out of presentation and I'll bring that back over. So it's essentially all about the containers. All of the containers are labeled according to the table that they are essentially coming from. So these are my stimulation interval rules. These are rules, as I scroll down, like these are rules that incorporate perforations in the stimulation interval. Here's just perforation, and it kind of, the containers themselves, that's what they mean now. So in my demonstration, when we first built this project, the containers were related to which team, Houston or Midland, the rules applied to. But then once we merged the organization, I realized it made a whole lot more sense to organize it this way. I do wish that I had a slightly better way of knowing which ones are which. At this point, I've worked with it enough that I know that I have a boatload of time log, and that if I click on the biggest one, it's going to take me to time log, and that other in whole is right above time log. And so that just comes a little bit with memory.
Can you talk a little bit more about that Alteryx workflow and how it compares to, say, something you could have done in R, Python, or some other sort of scripting, and how that user interface in Alteryx might have helped with the design of the project, with the other teams, and just with the workflow optimization as you went through it?
Sure. So as it relates to, I'll talk about what I could have or could not have done in Spotfire, and then I'll mention Python or R a little bit. So I don't think I mean, maybe I could have built this in Spotfire, but it would have been so ungodly slow, it wouldn't have even been worth the effort. Because when I started out building it in Spotfire, we had not that many rules. We only had about 10 or 15. I had no idea when we started that it was going to grow to be almost 100 rules. That's what we're at today. Now, with that said, Alteryx, one of the blessings and curses of Alteryx is that it works at a very, very granular level. And so a lot of times there are things that you could do with 3 or 4 lines of Python code that's going to take you 10 tools in Alteryx, which seems kind of silly. Except you do have the ability to incorporate Python and R scripts within Alteryx. I didn't do so in this workflow because I kind of expected to run into problems, and I knew I could use the Alteryx tools fairly easily. But we do have other workflows within the company where we're incorporating Python code into our Alteryx workflows. Did that answer all of that question?
Yeah, a little bit. Can you explain a little bit more I mean, I haven't actually used Alteryx. I know a little bit about it, and I think Matt Radich had a question about interacting with the rest of the team on using the, I think he's asking about using the Alteryx tool. Can you talk a bit more about how specifically that works and how that helped in like specifically to be better than what you could have done in anything else? Especially, I mean, I get that Spotfire just can't handle the effort to do it, but some more detail on Alteryx would be really helpful, certainly for me.
So I see Matthew's question now. Has the rest of your team been able to build onto this? We have used several of the queries that I built. I've had other team members come in and steal the opening queries, or just kind of a lot of times come to me for advice on how to join certain tables and incorporate data from tables in WellView, because WellView is a very highly normalized database. There's a whole lot of tables, and sometimes the relationships are fairly straightforward. You have what are called these ID rec and ID rec parent, and it's sort of a hierarchical tree structure on the table structure, but it doesn't always work that way. And so a lot of the team has used this as a template for other work that they're doing with WellView. And then, of course, as I mentioned earlier, we've taken the start of it. So you can see here I'm querying job type equals completion original. And for the drilling stuff, I just changed job type to drilling original. And then we made a lot of this stuff work for drilling because much of it is common, like the connection to AFEs, the connection to phases, the connection to the time log and the daily ops reports. That's all the same. Trying to think if there's anything else that I wanted to throw in. Yeah, no, it's been a really good learning experience. I would like to figure out, there's a couple of ways that I've been working on to try to make it run a little bit faster. In Alteryx, it's worth noting that you can cache your data sources. And so I would just, the reason that it's organized this way is I want to just be able to take my mouse and run my mouse down these input tools. And then I will right click and say cache and run workflow. And then subsequent runs of the workflow will be working off of a cache rather than querying the data source every time. And so I've been trying to teach myself little tips and tricks for making it run faster. And another thing that I've done is incorporated what are called user constants. And so in this little workflow tab, I've created 2 user constants. I'll make this a little bit bigger. And I've written a blog post about doing this. I have something called status ready, not ready, and well filter, and that's a well identifier in WellView. And so if I want to run only a single well through this entire workflow, I'll just come in here and switch this to say ready. And then after every single one of my input tools, I have a filter that's looking at this ready, not ready. And if I put in there ready and the well filter, it'll just, after this point, it's only going to send one well's data through the whole thing. So I've learned a whole lot with regards to trying to make things more efficient and run faster. Let's see. Well, let me make the chat bigger. Oh man, I didn't even see some of these. So people like the presentation title. True. I've wondered, because I've seen some well naming in our stuff that might be The Office. And I do think that if you're allowed to name wells, you should definitely take advantage of being able to name things. Okay, so does Alteryx let you develop and customize new tools of your own to incorporate later for other projects? Or are you limited to what's already built under the developer? The answer to that is yes. They do allow you to customize new tools. And there's different ways that you can do that. And I thought I had turned off my Teams, but apparently I did not. So let's see if I can get rid of that. not what I wanted to do. So Alteryx has an SDK where you can build out your own tools. And so this crew macro is an example of a company, an individual who has used the SDK to create a whole suite of tools that do things that Alteryx didn't do out of the box. This is free and you can install it. Now, the term macro, in addition to tools like this that people just put out there, you can build what are called batch macros. And there's another phrase that I'm just blanking on right now. No, macros is what I'm looking for. And basically, with macros, you create a mini workflow. So if I wanted to create, say, something that is a currency converter, I could open up a new workflow and bring in a series of select tools, filter tools, formula tools to create a currency converter. And then if I save it as a macro, it'll essentially allow me to have another tool up here that I can drag down, and it will perform that currency conversion. So without an example, that's really kind of hard to explain, but the short answer to your question is that yes, they do allow you to incorporate your own construction so that you can have drag and drop or plug and play into other workflows. And then there's a question is, how often do you need to run everything? In Alteryx, we have the Alteryx server, and we can publish workflows up to what's called the Alteryx gallery. And within the gallery, there is a scheduling tool. And so I have scheduled this workflow to be run 3 times a day. And yeah, we can do a whole lot with our scheduler. How challenging or easy would it be to apply or modify the workflow to other domestic basins or even to an international basin project? One of the query conditions in this query is based on my region. And so I would have to come in and change the region or the field or the basin in each of my input tools. And I originally actually had a bit of a header tool or a header query pulled out separately. And I would query the job and then query to the header, query the AFE, and then join to the header. But that was essentially slowing down my project. So I have incorporated a header query in every single one of my input tools. And so I would need to go into my input tools and tell it, pull from Midland, Houston, or a different area. And so the amount of work is just the number of input tools that I have, which isn't horrible. I don't think that's too bad. And I think that's all the questions.
I'll throw one more out. You sound like you've had a real success interacting with the rest of the company and across a lot of teams. And something I know a lot of people that are doing work, maybe not this advanced, but trying to do projects like this run into is getting successes with getting people to take on or use the work that they're doing as they build dashboards for others. Do you have any comments for how you built this and the whole process of making it a successful tool for the company?
Yes. So, oh man, I almost hate my answer. And that is a really good question. So this is huge and doing a whole lot of stuff. But at the end of the day, what our field staff gets is an email with an Excel attachment. And so I think it's been successful because I communicated the output in a format that the field staff were comfortable with and capable of working with. And I also listened to them whenever they said, hey, your first version isn't working for us. And so, and then I'm also very communicative with them whenever I make changes, or whenever, quite honestly, whenever I screw something up, I will email them and tell them, hey guys, you're going to see 3,000 errors this morning because I botched a join. I'll get it fixed by 2 p.m. And so I feel like that communication is also helpful because a lot of interaction between, and I'm not IT per se, but historical interaction between IT and the business has been a lot of, and I've seen this in all companies, not just, it's not an SM thing, of IT not being as receptive and responsive to the business as they would like them to be. And so I work in a service organization, and so I consider one of my primary jobs to be that of meeting their needs and making sure that I communicate clearly and often, and that I listen to what they're telling me. So I think that had a lot to do with it. And then another question on, would you do anything differently if you started again from scratch? And the answer is actually yes, because I've reworked this so many times. There's a lot of things that I've gone back in and changed. And like I said, when I first built this, I didn't include this well view well header query. This wasn't in here. And because I kind of thought, well, I'll just keep that outside and I'll join to it and I'll join all my tables to it and it'll be fine. All of the things that I have modified have been for the purpose of making it faster. And so, and like these user constants, I didn't used to have these in place. I put these in place because I needed to make everything run faster. And this allows me to just push one well through everything. And I don't know why my Teams is still popping up. I guess Microsoft just will not let you get away, because I've closed that application everywhere that it's open and it is still popping up. Let's see here. Have you found ways to limit the ability for errors to be introduced into the source data? Oh man, that's a little bit of a can of worms that I'm afraid of opening up. So I know that there are more things that we could do in WellView in terms of limiting what they enter. Not being able to enter dates into the future, not being able to leave nulls in certain screens. And I've thought about that, but I don't know. Our work, I don't know how anybody else feels right now, but I feel like since COVID, I've actually got way more work than less. And so it's just been a can of worms that I haven't wanted to open, because I can't actually, and this is also a bit of my bias, because I am totally willing to take on work where I have control and where I can get into the system. And I don't really have that in WellView. So it's not like I can go in and make a bunch of adjustments in WellView. I'm kind of more comfortable in this space. So that's probably my own bias. And also, thank you for the compliment. Did you have to create an additional metadata to track and manage this workflow? I'm not quite sure what you mean by metadata, but
I was wondering if you had to create any additional fields to keep track of what was going on with all the joins and merges and management of the workflow.
That's a really good question. I feel like I should have. I use containers a lot, and I use a lot of the documentation tools. That's a better spot for that. Like, you can create these annotations, and so I take use of annotations. I put things in containers. I use their comments a lot, and I haven't found a better solution for that yet. Thank you for the team suggestion. Ooh, Travis, appreciate that.
Hey, Julie, how did you roll this out at SM? Does it really just you and your team that uses this and creates the reports that then go out to operations in the field where they can, see what they need to fix? Or do other teams have access to create their own workflows? Did you do, corporate-wide training in this? I guess how widely is it used? And
yeah, no, that's a really good question. So when we started with Alteryx, we weren't sure how it was going to go. So we started with a handful of licenses, and we had known need. And so wherever we knew that there was something that had the bandwidth and the desire and the business need, those folks would get training, and those folks would get licenses. And then we would have like a 6-month window where we were monitoring usage. And at the end of that 6-month window, if folks weren't using that license, then it got taken back. And as we started using it more and more, and people started seeing different workflows or the outputs of different workflows kind of permeating throughout the company, we would get requests for licenses. And so we would kind of hold on to those names. And then as we let go of licenses, we would dole out more. We would do training to make sure that people did, would learn how to use the app. We haven't done much Alteryx training this year, and I think we've kind of hit a good place with our licenses where the people who need them have them. And so that's kind of how we managed it. But the Alteryx licensing was managed from within AAET. Did that answer all of your questions?
Yes, no, that's perfect. About how, like, is it usually like one person per team kind of owns it, or do you see that a lot of people want to get their hands in it? I guess kind of like as a percentage.
That's a really good question that I feel like I should know the answer to, and I don't. I think we've had a little bit more than one person per team. We don't have as many, and what I kind of equate it to is our Spotfire rollout, just because I was so heavily involved in that. Because with the Spotfire rollout, we had an enterprise license, and so anybody who wanted a license could have it. And with Alteryx, it's been a little bit more selective in that you need to have a desire to learn, because a lot of this is self-taught. You must have an actual business case, not just you want to learn Alteryx. And you actually have to have the capacity or the bandwidth to take it on at this current time, because a lot of people, or whenever the license was available, because a lot of people would want to work in it, but they just couldn't find the time to do it. So you had to have those 3 things. And if you met those 3 requirements, we were going to find a spot for you.
Perfect. Thank you.
Cool. Well, thanks, Matt. I'm glad you enjoyed it. Matt?
Does anybody else have a question they want to ask? This has been a really good project, really introduction to sort of a successful workflow and the use of Alteryx. I've heard a lot about it, but haven't seen anything beyond sort of their marketing materials. This has been fantastic. Thanks for sharing.
Awesome. Yeah, so feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn or the website or the YouTube channel. I've put up content once a week.
Awesome. Thank you, Julie.
Okay.
Thanks,
Another
everyone.
presenter, or is that wrap this one up?
He wraps it up.
Sweet. All right. Well, thank you so much.
Thanks. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Julie. This was tremendous. And just a reminder, everyone, we'll have another presentation in about 2 weeks. And as ever, we're always looking for other good ideas or good things people want to see presented. We've kind of got a little bit of a queue going, but I'm always thrilled to hear new ideas. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Bye.